we're going to talk about a handful of topics that have been in the outward-facing visibility information for this meeting. Really more business-focused than technology-focused as to what's happening to impact your revenue stream attached to cybersecurity. And when you do take the path down on a cybersecurity basis, what can you do to then promote that to your other customers to have differentiation and drive revenue with it? And look at this as, yes, a necessary evil in the sense of protecting my business, but also, I have an opportunity to be a thought leader in my industry and to prove to my customers that I care about their data and about their protection, and to use it in a branding and marketing perspective. We'll see how some of that plays out as well. But in the meantime, let me introduce, in addition to myself, Mark Kirstein for Cosant Cybersecurity, interfacing with clients who are working with us to help their compliance and their sales team remove revenue friction, the topic of our discussion today. But then I'll also introduce our two experts in the cybersecurity field from slightly different perspectives, but Tyler from TB Consulting and Brian also from Cosant on the compliance and security policy side. So Tyler, can you give a brief introduction to yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you mentioned, my name is Tyler Edgett. I am the security practice manager at TB Consulting. I've been doing IT security now for a little over 10 years. I was on the engineering side, then architecture, and now in this sort of a strategic position now. But basically, we have a software, an MSSP, and we try to deliver excellent services to customers, and we partner with people like Cosant, right, who can provide that strategic thought and the compliance roadmaps, and they're really experts in the compliance field, and then we partner with them to deliver on that, right? It's one thing to have great policies and procedures and have an idea of what you want to do, but it's another thing to execute. So that's sort of where we at TBC focus.
All right, and Brian, can you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. My name is Brian Gregg. So I've got about 40 years of experience in cybersecurity. I started out working for Motorola 10 years there in the 80s and 90s, before most security was just maintain a mainframe, and so I got started back in a much different environment. I run security for several different worldwide companies. I have consulted on security, and I've also been the vice president of some of the largest software company in the world, managing their security portfolio. So that's given me a interesting look at the industry, and that I have both been the user and on the consulting side, and then also building products. So I'm able to get a different perspective of security. I do a lot of work with major corporations in helping them to become more security compliant, and my work with Cosant is I'm a virtual CISO, and so what I do is help customers to either become compliant or to improve their security in order to protect themselves and their assets more. So thank you.
All right, excellent. So this is really more of and it is a Q&A format. We're going to ask a few questions of Brian and Tyler to get their input, but at the same time, we do have a few graphics to share. So I'll switch back and forth periodically with a little bit of graphics and align them with some of the questions that we have. And we'll start with you, Brian, if you could. Can you go through a little bit of a landscape, if you will, of what the cybersecurity requirements look like for different industries? And what we're getting at here is, for people who are participating in the webinar, which ones should be on my radar screen, depending on which industry, and when is cybersecurity compliance likely to have an impact on me?
Sure, absolutely. So most people have heard of cybersecurity compliance when it comes to PCI, because any credit card, company. So if you accept credit cards, if you're doing any kind of business with your taking credit cards, that's your first entry into PCI. HIPAA is for your healthcare records, and that's by anybody that has either, and then we've got HIPAA, which is healthcare information, and that information is protected by healthcare companies, hospitals, and such. That requires the provider in order to be secure your information. Mark, if you want to flip back to, there you go.
Oh, sorry.
Most companies that are dealing with the private or public entry anyways look at SOC 2, which is the financials, making sure that you've got a robust security around your financial information. And then we have NIST 800.171 or -171. That's a specific part of the actual NIST. NIST framework is, as you look at the very left-hand side, that is the basis. Basically, that's the basic cybersecurity framework for the entire world. It was based on U.S. technologies, and NIST put it into play in order to give any company a background on how to provide just good basic security and do it in a framework that makes sense. And then to the far end on the right scale, then you've got the FedRAMP, which is the most comprehensive of any of the government certifications. And those are for any company that's actually trying to do work with the US government. And then just to the left of there is something that's fairly new, but it's taken on a whole new world of its own, and that's called CMMC. And that's the capability maturity matrix. And basically what that is if you're doing business currently today with the US government, DoD in specific, is they've got suppliers. And those suppliers, just like some of the most famous hacks that have occurred recently, came through their vendors. So what CMMC is doing is it's pushing down the requirements of security down to the supplier chain network. And it's requiring companies to make sure that their suppliers are certified in some of the most basic areas of security. So it's coming down that within the next 1 to 2 years, they're going to start sending out notes or letters, and a lot of people have already received them, saying, here's some information we need to know from you. Are you DFARS compliant? Are you FAR compliant? Do you have basic security placed from NIST 800-171? And if you don't, by the way, you're going to no longer be able to get new contracts from us. So we're already seeing those letters come out, but it's going to hit the entire supply chain of DoD within the next 1 to 2 years. So we're getting a great deal of people that are asking us about, what do I do? How do I become compliant? But those are just the big ones. There are a lot of others out there that are, compliance and regulations that some companies are being held to be accountable for.
Well, again, looking at a broader picture here and tying it to some specifics, we're probably all familiar with the Solarwinds intrusion and breach that happened earlier, which was a supply chain attack. Tyler, can you kind of relate that supply chain attack to how compliance requirements are starting to increase across different industries and how those are related to each other?
Yeah, absolutely. And so CMMC is it starting to become more formalized? But I mean, even prior to CMMC, which is been in the last couple of years, virtually any RFP that you're going for, whether it was a government entity or not, right? They had some part of their, if it was a mature organization that you were looking to do a bid for, was going to have in there some vendor management questions, some questions that related to what are you doing for security, what are you doing in these areas? Again, very basic. And like I said, oftentimes tied to NIST, but the Solarwinds breach, right? It opened a lot of eyes. We had some customers. Solarwinds is a super popular product. We had customers that we ended up having to do incident response investigations and going and make sure that they weren't breached. We had some customers that do have ties to the DoD, and the guidance from CISA, which is basically like the DoD's, it's like the Information Security Agency for America. CISA's guidance was basically shut it all down, right? And so you look at like the operational implications of that. I can no longer monitor my network. I can no longer monitor my systems. I can no longer patch stuff, right? So there's huge implications to that. But it was so severe, and the breadth of the area, and the people who were being targeted were those people who did have ties into the DoD. It was actually really interesting to see. We had, like I said, multiple customers that were running that software, and we found that only the ones that were dealing with DoD were actually basically there was a way to find out if there was actually actively being exploited. There was some files and things you could look for to see if it was actively being exploited. And the customers that were in the manufacturing space or things like that, they ended up not, we found no evidence of actual breach or interaction with the nation state attacker that carried on the attack. But in those ones that were tied to the government agencies, we found that stuff, right? And we basically had to shut it all down. And there was, obviously a huge operational implications to that. But then we had to work with the government, with the reps of those government agencies to walk through, okay, when can we start to rebuild these lines? They basically just cut off the lines of communication, right? And so you're in the dark at that point. But and it took us a while to get back up to where we could, reopen those lines of communication with the vendor, with the government agencies. It was bad.
Yeah. Well, and two things popped into my head as you were talking. One of them is opening the eyes of businesses, enterprises in particular, to their vulnerability to their supply chain, and even from companies that they perhaps didn't think they would be vulnerable from, like a Solarwinds that's in the security industry. They thought they would think, hey, this is a security company, they're not going to be a source of vulnerability. And all of them applying it more broadly. But the other thing that occurred to me is what you said at the end, which is these large manufacturers, in some cases enterprise level manufacturers, who were caught in the net of SolarWinds, but not the target. And that reminds me of the small and medium businesses that say, hey, I'm too small to be a target for cybersecurity. It wouldn't happen to me because I don't have any valuable data. But you don't have to be the target. You can get caught in the net just because you're in the same ocean.
Yeah.
And the bad guys are net
Collateral
fishing.
damage.
Yeah, your collateral damage. And they're really targeting the Department of Energy, but they accidentally catch, it seems ironic to say they accidentally catch an enterprise level company, because they're usually more secure than the small and medium businesses. Small and medium businesses accidentally get caught all the time.
Yep.
So Brian, wonder, how do you expect, or what, put on your guru prognostication hat to say, how is this going to change broadly over the next 12 to 24 months as far as compliance filtering through? Because like Tyler said, it's already in the Department of Defense that all of your RFPs are going to have security questionnaires or compliance requirements. How is that going to potentially broaden because of the increased visibility and the increased volume of attacks?
Absolutely. Well, the conversations are already happening. In fact, they've been happening for about 6 months. And that CMMC was a way for the US government to be able to push this, to force companies to become compliant. And they actually looked at, how do we do this to companies that aren't doing business with the US government? What they came up with was, it was very difficult because of our economy and the way we work. We're a very democratic type of, market-driven economy. And how do we be able to force companies to be able to do that? Well, you're going to do it in a couple of different ways. One is some of the compliance regulations that we're seeing here already that we've got out there. They're going to become more strict. But the other one is that we're seeing is that they're looking at the same kind of CMMC that's being used for DoD. They're looking at doing that for other kinds of companies. And it's going to be very interesting to see what they can get through the legal aspects of it. But you just got to remember that it's got to be a point of dollars and cents at some point in time. Is we are bleeding out money to nation states that want to do us harm. China, North Korea, Iran. The last numbers I saw with Iran, forget about the 40 billion that the Obama administration gave Iran that helped their nuclear. They're making much more money from us in the cybercrime area. So it's kind of funny. Forget about oil. They're making more money on some cybercrime than they are doing selling oil. Russia, hand over foot. There are cities in Russia that we know of that are 95% revenue coming into those cities is coming from cybercrime. As this has become a business. There are countries, China and Russia are two of them, that have literally call centers. They have websites where you can go on and professionally request, a cyber attack, a piece of software, malware, anything you want, you can buy on the dark web. So this is an economy of its own. And just like I said, Forbes mentioned earlier, if it was a country, it'd be the third largest economy in the world. It is big business. So the US has to find some way of at least turning the tourniquet on the bloodletting and helping out American industry to survive. Otherwise, we're going to be prone to collapse very, very quickly.
Well, and it strikes me, we characterized the CMMC, which of course now is putting teeth behind the standards that existed before 800, 171. I don't want to get into technical terms that are not broadly known across this, but CMMC now says you must do this or you don't get any business, and we're going to validate it, similar to the SOC 2 requirement on the software marketing services side, where the enterprise companies are saying you must be SOC 2 certified within 6 months or else you won't. But that's a private, right? That's more of them protecting their own private interests. But it also strikes me like you said, Tyler, the government, as the government looks at the impact on the economy and the trickle out effect, not only from national security, but just economically, like the gas pipeline, it's a private, it's a private business, but it's having a economic impact in the billions, not in the millions. How do they then regulate the broader economy, the private economy, right? So one, of course, is regulations that say you must meet these standards, whether they fund that or just put it as an increased cost that businesses are going to have to comply to. Or another one is to increase the penalties that says if something does happen, here's what, if you haven't done these things, then you're going to be held liable. Those type of engagements. So let me switch gears just a little bit. It's still in the same thing, but requirements in the marketplace, that are starting to impact. So how do companies see these compliance requirements cascading, and what's going to be the indicator to them of I'm in this web of I didn't think I was in the cybersecurity world, but all of a sudden my sales team is being impacted and my revenue is getting impacted. Either one of you want to comment on what you're seeing on that front, as far as I just need to get rid of the revenue friction.
Well, I'll take it real quick. First off is we're hearing a lot of sales organizations that are saying we're drowning in questionnaires. We heard one just this morning. In fact, he said that we're getting in, several security questionnaires every day. And that takes up our entire department just answering, security questionnaires. So that's on the sales side. I would say on the other side, which is that, how is it going to trickle down, and it's going to require and force people to have to stand up and be accountable. We've heard companies since February that are receiving letters that say basically a cease and desist. You'll fill this in, you're going to answer my questions, and if you answer no to any of these security questions, you're not going to get any more of my business, period. So we've been seeing those come up from major corporations starting in February, and we're seeing these letters, and basically it's a matter of if you want to continue in business, you're going to have to improve your security. And so a lot more of these companies, I think it's going to be a trickle down effect. If I have to be more secure, I have to make sure my supplier chain is more secure too.
Yeah, and I would, absolutely. I would add on to that, right? A lot of the compliance regulations that are being put in place on maybe the people who people on this call are targeting, right? Their customers are asking them specifically to have that, right? Some of the things, and then some of those frameworks we talked about previously, NIST and FedRAMP and things like that, they require that you have a vendor management program, and that you do, like, there are literally strict compliance controls calling out exactly, you have to make sure that they do these things, right? So it's not all just them. That's not they're being bad people or whatever. They're of course trying to worry about their risk and do risk management, but a lot of it is that they're being told that they have to do that, right? And so they're being held accountable, and that follows down, right? Then their vendors have to be held accountable.
Well, and it strikes me, based on your feedback, Tyler, that this just continues to propagate, meaning, you set compliance standards on one entity, but then they send them down to their suppliers, and then they send them down to their suppliers. So you may be downstream from one of these regulated industries and end up, seeing this compliance requirement and these security questionnaires, because everybody ends up being required to do it.
Right. Otherwise, you basically have to draw lines of delineation, right? And you have to be able to prove to your auditor that no, they don't have access to that, right? You have to sort of compartmentalize the information that is under the jurisdiction of that given compliance framework and be able to say, no, I have it all right here. They don't have access to it. But that's a lot of work and that's difficult. So it's a lot easier for them to just say, okay, if I have to do this, then you guys have to do that. And then that way I can basically, it makes my audits a lot easier.
Yep. Well, and a lot of these compliance requirements, these security questionnaires, and one of the questions we want to get to in our discussion today is, okay, this is happening to me, or it's happening to my customers, or I'm familiar with this broadening umbrella of compliance and security requirements. I also want to get more secure because I don't want to be a victim of this situation. But the broader picture is, what exactly is that security plan? What does that security program look like? So I'm going to share another quick screenshot here, and Brian, perhaps you can kind of walk through, what does a security plan look like, so that everybody has an idea of, in order to pass an audit, in order to meet some of these compliance standards, what do I got to do?
Yeah. There are basic requirements within a security plan. It will note them. NIST is one of the ones that does a really good job, but there are lots of other sources out there of some good information, but it will list you the basic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things that you have to meet a good security plan. Those things, turn into configuration standards, things like that. And then from that, you generate evidence. So basically, this security plan is like, I use the analogy to the plan for D-Day. It didn't map out and tell every, general and every, group or battalion what they were going to do. The D-Day plan was literally one sheet of paper, and it said, these are going to be what we're going to, this is how high level, this is what we're going to do on June 4th. And so it's the same kind of thing with system security plan. It's high level. It's going to map out what your company is going to do to be able to be security compliant. I've seen them, be as short as 3-4 pages, with just a matter of how everything is denoted. But they can be, as long as you need them to be, with regards to the information that you're going to be providing. But that's one of the things that we do, as a service, as part of the security compliance and improving security, is walk a customer through how to easily and quickly build a system security plan. So we take off all the buzz and all of the the glistening and all the marvel of it, and reduce it down to something that's we can easily get through with a customer, because it is a requirement now in a lot of different regulations.
Well, and it strikes me that a good part of this is build the plan, build the process policies, because that's what I need to do to cross over into the audit. But as I build this plan and I build it out and identify where my gaps are and the things that I need to do, I put in controls that are put in place. And then, because it's a common project management, it's not a this happens easily, in the sense, especially the larger you get, the more complex it gets, but it is a project. So you got to build a project plan, you've got to execute against the project plan, you've got to get to the finish line, and then you got to prove it to a third party that doesn't care whether you pass or not. But in the meantime, always when we're doing a project like this, we're always sitting across the table from somebody that's going to be implementing the controls, somebody that's going to be standing up the technology, somebody that's going to be operating these things on a day-to-day basis, which is typically an MSP or an MSSP. So Tyler, perhaps you can kind of bring in our a typical partnership that we would have with somebody like you, that where you're implementing and doing all the security controls, and we're building the plan that specifies what controls and where they go. What is the role of an MSSP? How does that fit with an MSP? Because people are often confused as to the distinction, and how do you play into this roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to answer that. First, I did want to mention, you guys are being modest. I would like to say one of the things that you guys do really, really well is not only identifying which framework is going to suit that organization best, but then also oftentimes it can be multiple, right? You may, we want to go for NIST, and then the NIST is going to roll into PCI, and then PCI is going to roll in, there's a bunch of these frameworks, and you guys, better than anybody else that I've seen, my practice in and of itself would be considered an MSSP, and that's just managed services security provider. That's just means security. Yeah, you know, like I said before, we basically come alongside whatever your compliance roadmap looks like, right? You guys, because we worked with you guys in the past, and what we'll do is we'll say, okay, you guys, these are all the controls that they need to meet. We need to meet as many of these as possible so that we can get ready for this audit in as quick a turnaround as possible. Again, because we're losing out on revenue here, and we are sort of we come in and we're that sort of zero to hero. Like we can, you know, with just these 2 or 3 services, we can meet, you know, 30-40% of these compliance objectives. Some of them are going to be policy and you guys will fill those, but working together with you guys, we're able to go back to the customer as a joint effort and say, okay, this is your roadmap. And in, you know, what would take you a year and a half to roll out on your own and cost a lot of money and all that, you can do on a fractional consumptional basis through a partner like TBC. And you can get all of these compliance objectives, you can get all these controls met in, you know, 30, 60, 90 days, right? And so you guys will be able to meet your timelines for compliance. So that I think is, you know, there's a whole lot of technical, and I would say how we do it better than other people and all that stuff. But that for the purpose of this discussion, really, it's about aligning with you guys. We go over we go over the compliance frameworks that you guys have selected and meet the needs of the customer. And we say, okay, we can meet all these controls right off the bat really quickly, you know, with a quick turnaround. We've done this lots of times. So we have the tools, the technology, the people, the process. We have everything that we need to be successful, and, you know, it's sort of a rapid rollout.
Yeah, it's I mean, ultimately it is very much of a partnership between the three. The client is trying to be secure, the you know, the project manager and compliance roadmap, and the implementer, you know, MSP and MSSP. I'm struck many times by the MSPs that aren't quite as security oriented as they should be, and they're hubs, meaning that they've got multiple customers and they sit with the keys to the kingdom for all of these customers, and they're not as secure as they should be. But that's a topic for another day. You know, compliance, you know, compromise, downside. I mean, it's easy in this industry to be full of fear and doubt, but, you know, the context that we're looking at is somewhat of a revenue focus, you know, because compliance is a government regulation or a customer regulation, but it strikes me that when you do these things, you know, when you become a secure organization, that your immediate next move is to say, hey, I want to tell all my clients this. And the mindset of, I hate security questionnaires, I hope I never see these again, or I hate compliance requirements, I hope I never see these again, suddenly becomes, I love security questionnaires because I can do them efficiently, and I love compliance requirements because I can do them efficiency, and the other companies aren't as mature as I am. And, you know, so how do we now take and I'm going to share another graphic here, take the fact that I've applied and become secure, and of course nobody can be 100% secure, but I've done the basic steps to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. Showing this to our audience, showing this to our customers. Most of the clients, many of the clients, if not all of the clients that we work with and get them through the compliance programs, their next step is to create what we see here, which is a trust center, and take credit and brag to their customers, but also become more efficient with their security questionnaires, because they can, as much as possible, direct the responses to a SOC 2 that's already been completed, or to the security trust center, where some of the information that's not proprietary or sensitive can be revealed. Brian, why don't you chat a little bit more about, you know, what it means to be able to demonstrate trust to your customers and to be able to protect your brand and reputation.
Well, that's one of the interesting things that, you know, people are always thinking about security as being a cost center. It's something that costs me but doesn't provide me any value. I've worked with companies that actually have turned it around, and I think we do an excellent job here at Cosant in being able to help our customers to look at that as an option, which is that I can differentiate myself, just like what Tyler's talking about with TBC Consulting. Not every MSP out there has anything to do with security. We were just talking with some people just yesterday morning, And we asked them about their MSP and what security, services they provide. And they were thinking that, something happened, that their MSP would be the person to call. And unfortunately, looking at their contract, they found out their MSP provided 0 security services. So they had no idea. And it wasn't until looking at the contract that they really realized that they would have been calling the wrong person, and they were open to some terrible abuse. So a lot of companies want to turn this around and actually make it a differentiator. Hey, I'm secure. Your information is going to be secure with me. Let me show you how I'm doing better than the other companies that you're dealing with. That's how you increase sales. So we've used this in several companies I've worked at in order to actually differentiate ourselves against the competition. And I think that's what more companies have to learn.
Yeah, and it strikes me in this context, we characterized our webinar as, how to reduce revenue friction. So compliance is revenue friction, responding to security questionnaires are revenue friction, especially when I hear the stories from sales operations that just grind to a halt when they have to confront a security questionnaire and shepherd that between the IT department and the legal department and the HR department. And meanwhile, they thought they had this contract that was ready to be signed and funded, and it's stalled for weeks. And the sales team is not selling during that period of time. The sales team is managing a security questionnaire.
Right. And I tell companies that are doing that, as soon as they tell me that they're drowning in security questionnaires, you're doing it the wrong way. You shouldn't be drowning in security questionnaires. If you're doing this the right way, this should be an opportunity for you. And if you're doing it the wrong way, you're drowning.
Yeah.
And that's what companies have learned.
It strikes me now as I'm thinking about this, there's revenue friction on the other side as well for the customer. If I'm looking at my supplier and I'm saying, at least one of my criteria, one of my things that I need to consider is security. Many other things, does it solve my problem? What is the investment level? Is the vendor reliable, et cetera? But one of them is security. If I'm looking at that supplier against a competitor and they can demonstrate their security, that's just like a checkbox that says, this is just one less thing I need to worry about and one less risk. If I'm a purchasing agent, I'm all about risk.
Absolutely.
I've got 3 jobs as a purchasing agent. One is to negotiate the price down at whatever cost. 2 is to make sure that the supplier doesn't let me down and drop the ball in terms of their operations. And 3, Lord forbid they put my company at risk, and I'm the enterprise, agent who didn't scrutinize or made a decision to ignore the security vulnerabilities.
Let me throw out a quick scenario to you of something that I hear happen so often. And that is an RFP is issued. The company says, here's what we're going to do. We got a multi-million-dollar contract we're going to be, offering out there. And we want your response back in the next week. And, oh, by the way, here's a security questionnaire that has 50 questions to it. We need this answered along with your response on cost. Now, if my company A, responds to that in the next 24 hours with a cost and with the security questionnaire all filled out and says, we're secure, this is why. What do you think that company's decision will be when the other 5 companies that respond to the RFP, 3 of them don't even include the answers to the questionnaire, and 2 of them are able to say yes to about 35 of the questions. The other 15, they have a lot of, well, we don't do that, but we do this. Where do you think the company's decision is going to go between company A or the other 4? It's a no-brainer.
Well, Brian, you made me chuckle just now because you reminded me of one of the security questionnaires. It was not a customer we were currently working with, but one that we were talking to about potentially working with. And we asked them to send over their security questionnaire responses. And not ever making fun of anybody or looking down on them, but at the same time, this security questionnaire went through and said, do you have multi-factor authentication? No. Do you have encryption? No. Do you use VPNs? No. Do you have policies in place? No. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your security? 9. I'm like, maybe you need a little bit of help filling out these security questionnaires, because this one's probably not going to get you the contract or the.
They should have took the blue pill, not the red pill on that one.
Taken the blue pill. So interestingly enough, and it very much surprised me as I become involved with Cosant for just about 2 years now. We look at security from this compliance standpoint, from this revenue standpoint, from this differentiation standpoint, and then we kind of throw in at the end, and oh, by the way, you get more security for free. Not for free, but as a natural fallout of doing this. You follow the process, you set this system up, and the security aspect comes along for the ride. And when it's driven by compliance requirements, or it's driven by revenue and security questionnaires, that is the driver why people are executing these projects, but they do get security. So Tyler, perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on, now I've got, I may not be 100% mature on all aspects of it, of all the controls, but I've got a framework. I've gone through the process. I've got the plans and the pieces together. How does that impact my actual risk and vulnerability to being a victim of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to answer this without getting too technical. Historically, especially coming from an engineering background, I've not always been a big fan of compliance. And the reason why is I saw over and over again people doing compliance, what I would consider wrong, from a security practitioner, what I would consider wrong, doing compliance for the sake of doing compliance, what we like to call checkbox security, right? Where the control says, maybe the control says I'm required to collect logs and keep them for 60 days or something like that. Okay, so technically, as long as it's being written to a log file somewhere, they're there. And nobody's looking at that, and nobody's actioning any of the information gathered from that. Like, I'm not gaining any actual security from that. Like, so, but technically, technically this logged, right? And so, by doing security, by taking that little bit of extra time, if you're already spending the time and the money and the effort to do these, compliance objectives and to get compliant with this stuff, just take the little bit of extra, I would actually argue that it's easier to do it right the first time, right? Because again, if you get audited and you did the checkbox security approach, gathering all that audit evidence is going to be very difficult. But so yeah, by doing security right while you're doing it, while you're of course aligning it with the compliance and framework and all built off of something, not just spending money on security to spend money on security, you're going to see a risk reduction. First of all, you're going to start tracking risk. I would argue that especially a lot of the companies that we talk to in the 500 to 5,000, people in the company space, they don't have a CISO, they don't have a framework, they're not basing it off of anything, they have no idea, they're not doing any sort of identity. The first pillar of the NIST framework is identify, right? That's about identifying your threat landscape, identifying who you may come up against, identifying where your risks are, and they haven't done that, right? And so they don't. Maybe they feel like they're super secure because they spent a bunch of money on security, but really it's they protected the wrong thing, and the crown jewels are over here, right? And so you're going to start to be able to track what amount of risk are you accepting, and is your security spend being spent in the right place, and start to have meaningful KPIs and metrics, and be able to track security is what I call security success, right? Reduce risks, stop attacks, things like that. So by doing it, like I would say, right, and not just security for the sake of compliance. Again, that's not knocking that, but if you take that little bit of extra effort and do it right, you're going to see payoffs in the long run. And again, in the event of a breach or something does get past your defenses, if you have worked in the other areas of the NIST framework, like to detect and respond, you'll be able to recover faster. You'll be able to detect that stuff in your environment quicker before it's spread across your entire environment, infected your backups, and you have to go back 6 months to get a clean backup, and you've lost 6 months worth of data. Like all of these sort of nightmare situations start to fade away.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me is the biggest part of that is companies approach security from a technology-only standpoint, and then they talk to a few technology vendors who give them an enterprise-class security solution for a medium-sized business or a small-sized business. Because that's what they sell, instead of right-sizing it or oriented around business and return on investment. And then they skip two aspects. They skip the policy and administration side of, which is your biggest vulnerability is your people. So how do you control it, keep your people from exposing exposing vulnerabilities? And then they also skip the other side, which is the respond and recovery. It's all about identify, protect, and detect. And then, well, wait a minute, what are we going to do if something happens? Because increasingly, especially in the security world, it's what are we going to do when something happens? You better have respond and recover covered. Any final thoughts that you have, Brian, as we're approaching the end of our time? Give us your 1 or 2 points of wisdom for takeaways for the audience.
Well, since I used to work for Verizon and I used to actually provide the yearly Verizon security report, I heard a FBI guy say years ago, and it was kind of funny at the time, but the more life goes on, it seems to be a reoccurring thing, which is that he said, I only know 2 people out there. One is the people that have been breached, and the other ones that are going to be breached. And the reason being is because if you're targeted by anybody, they're going to find a way in. I know very, very, very few companies that go through a PIM test and have 100% compliance and complete security. The biggest companies out there, and you name them, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, whatever, look at how many times they've had to announce that they've gotten breached or that they've gotten hit. So if a major company with thousands of people that are doing security is getting hit, you got to look at the fact of have I been breached, or do I even know if I've been breached if I have been? Because according to the Verizon report, it takes a year before most companies even find out that they've been breached. So by that time, you don't know how much that they've gained information-wise on you and what they've got. And personally, myself, I get tired of hearing how a company had to accidentally wire $800,000 to a company, and then they found out that it wasn't the supplier, or they didn't even have a contract because of cybercrime. So I hate the fact that we're bleeding money out as a country and funding terrorism and bad guys in other countries. So I just kind of hope that people listen, they get on the bandwagon, and they try to help become a little bit more secure now before government regulations start stepping in and forcing us to do it.
Yep. And final thoughts, Tyler, and then we'll finish up and get everybody back out to their lunch hour.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing I would finish with, right, is what are you, what is your framework, right? What are you basing? I assume you're doing something, right? You have antivirus, you have a firewall, like you're doing, I assume you're doing some basics, but like, what are you basing so you feel like you're like, I guess if somebody asked you, are you doing enough in terms of security? How would you answer that? And what would you base that off of, right? Like, what's your metric? What's your measure? What's your ruler, right? Like, you can't build a house without some frame of reference inside. Like, you need something to measure that stuff off of. What are you measuring your security off of? What's your framework? And if you don't have a good answer to that question, I think that's probably time to start thinking about that.
Excellent. Thanks, Tyler. You did remind me of when I said companies jump ahead into the technical solution and build an enterprise solution for a medium or small business. And your analogy to building a house reminded me of it's like starting to build the house without actually drawing up the plans first.
Yeah.
You need somebody to be an architect and actually decide where the walls are going to be, what the house is going to look like. So thank you for all of our attendees. I appreciate you guys showing up, and if there's anything that we can do to help you guys either directly or somebody in your universe that needs help, either from a technical implementation side for TV consulting or a security advisory service VCSO type engagement for Cosant, we would be happy to have any conversations with no strings attached. So with that, and thank you to our speakers as well, Brian and Tyler.
Great day.
Hey, guys.
Great day. Bye-bye.